Riverton had always been proud of its silence. It was the kind of town where nights were so quiet that people could hear the wind brushing against porch railings and the distant bark of a dog echoing across empty streets. Nothing truly bad ever seemed to happen there, and when people spoke about crime, they spoke as if it belonged to big cities far away, not to a place where everyone recognized each other's cars and waved without thinking. Laura Bennett fit perfectly into Riverton's calm rhythm. At 32, she lived alone in a small blue house at the edge of town, close enough to the woods that trees leaned over her backyard fence. She worked as a librarian at the local school, a job that suited her gentle nature. Children trusted her, teachers relied on her, and parents described her as the kind of person you never worry about. She had routines that rarely changed. She left for work at the same time every morning, stopped by the same cafe twice a week, and spent her evenings reading or listening to quiet music. On the day Laura died, nothing seemed different. She woke up early, made herself a simple breakfast, and went to work as usual. At school, she helped a group of students find books for a history project and smiled when one of them thanked her. A co-worker later remembered that Laura seemed tired but calm, like someone lost in thought. When asked if something was wrong, Laura shook her head and said she just hadn't slept well. After work, she stopped by the grocery store. Security footage would later show her pushing a small cart, buying bread, soup, and tea. Nothing unusual. No one followed her. No one spoke to her longer than necessary. She paid in cash and walked out alone. As evening settled over Riverton, Laura returned home. The sun dipped behind the trees, painting her street in soft orange light. Neighbors later told police they saw her car pull into the driveway around 6:40 p.m. She waved at an elderly man watering his lawn across the street, then disappeared inside her house. From that moment on, the town would never feel the same. Inside her home, Laura moved through familiar motions. She put away the groceries, made herself a bowl of soup, and turned on the radio. Soft music filled the living room. The windows were closed. The doors were locked. Everything was exactly how she liked it. At 9:15 p.m., Laura called her best friend, Emma Collins. The two had known each other since college and spoke often, sometimes just to talk about small things. That night, their conversation began normally. Emma later told police that Laura sounded distracted, but not afraid. She mentioned feeling uneasy, though she could not explain why. As they talked, there was a brief pause. Laura went quiet for a moment. Emma asked if she was still there. Laura laughed softly and said she thought she heard something outside, probably the wind. They continued talking for another half hour. At 9:47 p.m., the call ended suddenly. Emma assumed the phone had died or the signal dropped. She sent a quick text asking Laura to call back. There was no reply. Emma did not think much of it at the time. Laura often went to bed early. By 10:30 p.m., the lights in Laura's house went off. A neighbor walking his dog noticed the darkness but thought nothing of it. The street looked peaceful. No strange cars. No raised voices. No sounds of a struggle. The silence remained unbroken. The next morning, Laura did not show up for work. At first, no one panicked. Laura had once called in sick without warning before. But as hours passed, concern grew. By noon, the school principal tried calling her phone. It rang without answer. At 2 in the afternoon, another call was made. Still nothing. By 4 o'clock, police were contacted. 2 officers arrived at Laura's house just before sunset. The sky was turning gray, and a cold wind moved through the trees. They knocked on the front door and called her name. There was no response. They walked around the house, checking windows and doors. Everything appeared normal. The front door was locked. Using a spare key provided by the school, the officers entered the house. The smell hit them first. Not strong, but wrong. The kind of stillness that makes the air feel heavy. The living room lights were off, but sunlight filtered in through the curtains. That was when they saw her. Laura Bennett lay on the living room floor, her body angled slightly toward the couch. One arm was stretched out, fingers curled as if she had tried to reach for something. Her eyes were open, staring at nothing. A single dark stain spread across her sweater. There was no blood splattered on the walls. No overturned furniture. Only a lamp knocked onto its side near her feet. The officers froze for a moment, then moved quickly. They checked for a pulse, though they already knew. Laura was gone. Backup arrived within minutes. The house was sealed off. Flashing lights cut through the quiet street, drawing neighbors out of their homes. People stood behind police tape, whispering, trying to understand how something so terrible could happen in their town. Detectives examined the scene carefully. Laura had been stabbed once in the chest. The wound was clean and precise. There was no weapon in sight. No knife in the kitchen sink. No blood trail leading away from the body. The doors and windows showed no signs of forced entry. The locks were intact. The alarm system had not been triggered. It was as if the killer had been invited inside. Forensic teams searched every room. They dusted for fingerprints, collected fibers, and examined the floor for footprints. What they found troubled them more than what they didn't. There were no clear fingerprints that didn't belong to Laura. No shoe prints that could be matched. No signs of a fight. No indication that Laura had tried to defend herself. The kitchen was clean. A cup of tea sat on the counter, cold and untouched. Laura's phone was not on her body. It was later found in the kitchen, screen dark. Time of death was estimated between 9:30 and 10 p.m., right after her phone call with Emma. As the night deepened, Detective Aaron Cole arrived at the scene. He had worked in Riverton for years and had handled everything from petty theft to domestic disputes. He had never seen a murder like this. He stood in the doorway of the living room, looking at Laura's body, trying to imagine how someone could walk into this house, take a life, and leave without a trace. Outside, the town watched in silence. News spread quickly. By morning, Riverton was gripped by fear. Parents walked their children to school. Doors were locked during the day. People glanced over their shoulders on quiet streets. One question filled every conversation. How could someone be murdered in Riverton without anyone hearing or seeing a thing? As dawn broke over the small blue house at the edge of town, it became clear that the silence Riverton once trusted had hidden something far darker than anyone had imagined. When the sun rose over Riverton the morning after Laura Bennett's murder, the town felt unfamiliar. The streets were the same, the houses unchanged, but something invisible had settled over everything. Fear moved quietly from one home to the next. People spoke in lower voices. Neighbors who once waved without thinking now studied each other's faces a little longer. Inside the Riverton Police Department, Detective Aaron Cole stood in front of a whiteboard filled with Laura's photograph, maps of her street, and handwritten notes. He had barely slept. The image of Laura lying on the living room floor replayed in his mind again and again. One clean wound. No struggle. No noise. It was the kind of crime that left more questions than answers. The first step was simple in theory but heavy in practice. Everyone close to Laura needed to be questioned. Daniel Price was the first name on the list. He and Laura had dated for nearly 2 years before ending their relationship 6 months earlier. In a town as small as Riverton, breakups rarely stayed private, and rumors had followed them for weeks after they separated. Some said Daniel had wanted to get back together. Others claimed Laura had ended things because she felt suffocated. Daniel arrived at the station later that morning. He looked exhausted, his eyes red and his shoulders tense. When Detective Cole told him Laura was dead, Daniel sat down heavily, covering his face with his hands. He stayed silent for a long moment before speaking. He admitted the breakup had been painful. He said they argued sometimes, like any couple, but insisted he never hurt her and never would. When asked where he was the night of the murder, Daniel said he was at home alone. That answer immediately raised concern. Being alone meant there were no witnesses. Cole pressed him for details. Daniel explained that he spent the evening watching television and talking to his sister on a video call. Phone records confirmed the call lasted almost 2 hours and ended well after Laura's estimated time of death. His sister supported his story, recalling what they discussed and even what Daniel was wearing. Daniel was released, but suspicion lingered. In cases like this, emotions mattered as much as evidence, and emotions could turn dangerous. The next person questioned was Emma Collins, Laura's closest friend. Emma arrived with swollen eyes and trembling hands. She had not slept either. When she spoke about Laura, her voice broke. Emma described their phone call from the night Laura died. She mentioned Laura sounding uneasy, distracted by something she couldn't see. That detail caught Detective Cole's attention. He asked Emma to repeat it, slowly. Emma insisted Laura never said she was afraid, just unsettled, as if she sensed something was off. Emma blamed herself for not checking on her after the call ended suddenly. She said she assumed Laura went to bed. Cole asked Emma where she was that night. Emma explained she had been at her parents' house for dinner, surrounded by family. Multiple people confirmed her presence. There was no gap in her timeline that placed her near Laura's home. As Emma left the station, Cole felt conflicted. She seemed genuine, but he also knew how close relationships could hide deep secrets. By the second day, rumors began to spread across Riverton. People whispered names in grocery store aisles and coffee shops. Everyone tried to make sense of the impossible by turning neighbors into suspects. Mark Henson, who lived across the street from Laura, quickly became a topic of concern. He was quiet, kept to himself, and spent a lot of time sitting on his porch. Some residents claimed they had seen him watching Laura's house more than once. Police brought Mark in for questioning. He was nervous but cooperative. He admitted to sitting outside often but said it was the only place he felt comfortable after losing his job months earlier. Watching the street helped him feel less alone. When asked about the night of the murder, Mark said he had gone out to buy snacks around 9:30 p.m. Security footage from a nearby gas station confirmed his story. The timestamp placed him miles away from Laura's house during the likely time of death. Still, people in Riverton were uneasy. Even when evidence cleared someone, fear found a way to hold on. Detective Cole widened the investigation. Laura's co-workers were questioned next. Teachers described her as kind and professional. No one recalled any conflicts. Students adored her. Parents trusted her completely. The idea that someone from her workplace could be involved seemed unlikely, but nothing could be ruled out. Cole reviewed Laura's recent activities in detail. Her bank records showed nothing suspicious. No large withdrawals. No unexplained expenses. Her computer revealed no secret conversations or online relationships. Her phone showed the usual mix of messages from friends and family. It was as if Laura had lived exactly the life everyone thought she lived. As days passed, the pressure on the police department grew. News vans parked outside the station. Reporters asked the same questions again and again. Did police have a suspect? Was the public in danger? Cole hated those questions because he had no clear answers. He returned to the crime scene repeatedly, walking through the quiet house, imagining the moments before Laura's death. The lack of chaos disturbed him. Most violent crimes left behind panic, noise, or at least confusion. This one felt controlled. Whoever killed Laura had been calm. That realization shifted Cole's thinking. He began to believe the killer was someone Laura trusted. Someone who could stand close to her without raising alarm. Someone she might have opened the door for without hesitation. Police created a timeline of Laura's final hours and placed every known contact on it. Friends, neighbors, co-workers, and even distant acquaintances were questioned again. Each time, the answers were the same. No one had seen or heard anything unusual. The town grew restless. Candlelight vigils were held outside the school. Flowers piled up near Laura's house. Grief mixed with fear in a way Riverton had never experienced. Behind closed doors, some residents began to point fingers at people who had already been cleared. Others accused the police of hiding information. Trust eroded quickly. Detective Cole felt the weight of every accusation. He knew the danger of rushing to judgment, but he also knew the danger of letting a killer remain free. Weeks passed without a breakthrough. Every suspect faded under scrutiny. Every lead ended in silence. The evidence refused to speak. By the end of the month, one truth became painfully clear. In Riverton, everyone had been a suspect at some point, and yet no one could be proven guilty. The murder of Laura Bennett had shaken the town to its core, and the deeper investigators dug, the more they realized how little they truly knew about the people living around them. The case was far from over, but already it felt like it was slipping into something far worse than an unsolved mystery. It was becoming a nightmare with no face. By the time the investigation entered its third month, the murder of Laura Bennett had stopped feeling like a recent tragedy and started feeling like an open wound that refused to heal. Riverton no longer spoke about the case with shock alone. Now there was frustration, fear, and quiet anger. People wanted answers, and Detective Aaron Cole wanted them even more. Every morning, Cole reviewed the evidence again from the beginning, hoping that something small he had missed would suddenly make sense. The crime scene photos, the forensic reports, the witness statements, all of it lay spread across his desk like pieces of a puzzle that refused to connect. The autopsy report was the first place he always returned. Laura had been killed by a single stab wound to the chest. The blade had pierced her heart with frightening accuracy. The medical examiner noted that the strike was clean and direct, suggesting intention rather than panic. This was not the kind of wound caused by a wild attack or sudden argument that spiraled out of control. Even more disturbing was what the report did not show. There were no bruises on Laura's arms, no cuts on her hands, no signs that she had tried to fight back. The absence of defensive wounds told a silent but powerful story. Laura had either trusted the person who stood in front of her, or she had not realized she was in danger until it was too late. That detail haunted Cole. If the killer had been a stranger, fear would have shown itself in some form. A scream. A struggle. Something. But there was nothing. The house remained almost untouched, frozen in a calm that felt wrong for such violence. Forensics teams worked tirelessly, but the evidence gave them very little. Fingerprints collected from the scene all belonged to Laura. Door handles, light switches, the kitchen counter. None of them showed signs of another presence. It was as if the killer had never existed in that space at all. There was a partial footprint found near the back door, faint and incomplete. It could not be matched to any shoe brand or size with confidence. It might not even belong to the killer. It could have been old, left behind days earlier. Blood analysis offered no new direction. There were no droplets leading away from the body. No bloody footprints. No smears. Whoever killed Laura had managed to leave without tracking blood through the house. That suggested planning. Cole began to wonder if the murder weapon had been brought in and taken out deliberately. A kitchen knife would have been easy to grab, but none were missing. If the killer used a personal weapon, it meant preparation, not impulse. Then there was Laura's phone. It had been found on the kitchen counter, face down, unlocked. At first glance, it seemed ordinary. But when Cole examined it more closely, something stood out. A message draft sat open on the screen. It had never been sent. It contained only one word. Why? There was no punctuation. No name. No context. Just one question. Cole stared at that word for a long time. He imagined Laura standing in her kitchen, phone in hand, typing it out. Was she confused? Hurt? Betrayed? Was the question meant for someone she knew? Someone she trusted? Someone who had just said or done something she could not understand? The phone record showed no outgoing messages after her call with Emma. No missed calls. No deleted texts. The message draft had never left her phone. Whatever moment had inspired that word had ended abruptly. That moment, Cole believed, was when Laura realized something was wrong. Investigators checked Laura's digital life carefully. Her emails were ordinary. Work messages. Newsletters. Notes about book orders for the school library. Her social media showed nothing alarming. No arguments. No threats. No secret conversations. There was no hidden relationship. No online stalker. No sign of blackmail or fear. It was as if Laura had been living peacefully until the exact moment her life ended. As the weeks passed, Cole felt the case slipping through his fingers. Leads dried up. Witnesses had nothing new to add. Every path he followed ended in silence. Then, nearly a year after the murder, something unexpected happened. An envelope arrived at the police station with no return address. It was addressed simply to the detective. Inside was a single sheet of paper, The handwriting was shaky, uneven, as if written by someone struggling to keep their hand steady. The message was short. The killer has already been questioned. You will never catch them. Some doors should never be opened. That was all. The letter sent a wave of tension through the department. It was the first direct communication connected to the case since Laura's death. For a brief moment, hope flickered. Maybe this was the mistake the killer would make. Maybe this was the crack they needed. But hope faded quickly. The paper carried no usable fingerprints. The envelope had been wiped clean. No DNA could be pulled from it. The stamp had been bought with cash. Surveillance footage from nearby stores offered no clear images. The letter was a dead end. Still, its message changed the way Cole thought about the case. The killer has already been questioned. That line echoed in his mind. Everyone close to Laura had been interviewed. Friends, neighbors, co-workers, family. If the letter was telling the truth, then the answer had been sitting in front of him all along. Cole went back through every interview transcript, listening to recordings late into the night. He searched for hesitation in voices, contradictions in timelines, words that felt rehearsed. Some people sounded nervous, but nervousness was normal. Fear could sound like guilt when listened to long enough. Nothing stood out clearly. Another detail began to trouble him deeply. The front door. Police reports noted that when officers arrived for the welfare check, the front door was locked. When they entered later, the key was found still inside the lock on the inner side of the door. At the time, it seemed meaningless. Laura often left it there when she was home. But what if that detail mattered more than anyone realized? If the door had been locked from the inside, how had the killer left? Unless they had their own key. That thought changed everything. Cole ordered a review of Laura's personal belongings. Her keys were checked. One house key was found on her keyring. No spare was discovered in the house. That alone was not unusual. Many people kept spares elsewhere. But Cole decided to dig deeper. Laura's bank statement showed a small transaction at a local hardware store just weeks before her death. It was for a key copy. When questioned, the store owner remembered her. Laura had come in on a quiet afternoon and asked for a spare house key. She did not seem rushed or afraid. When asked why she needed it, she smiled and said it was just in case. Just in case of what? No one knew. Police searched for the spare key but never found it. Laura's friends denied receiving it. Her family knew nothing about it. No neighbor admitted to having it. The spare key had vanished. This discovery fit too well with the crime scene. No forced entry. No broken locks. A quiet killer who walked in and out without raising alarm. Someone had entered Laura's home as if they belonged there. Despite this realization, the investigation stalled again. Knowing a key was used did not tell them who used it. There was still no physical evidence tying any person to the crime. The anonymous letter, the missing key, the unanswered why on Laura's phone all pointed toward a truth that refused to be fully revealed. As months turned into years, the case lost priority. New crimes demanded attention. Resources were pulled away. Laura's file grew thicker, but no closer to resolution. Detective Cole felt a deep sense of failure. He had dedicated his career to protecting Riverton, and now the town carried a secret it could not face. The evidence existed, but it led nowhere. The truth was close enough to feel, yet impossible to touch. And somewhere in Riverton, or far beyond it, the person who knew exactly what happened on that quiet night continued to live their life, untouched by the law. The case was still open, but hope was fading. Laura Bennett's murder had become a story of clues without answers, a trail that ended in silence, and evidence that spoke just loudly enough to remind everyone that justice does not always arrive. Sometimes, it simply disappears. 5 years after Laura Bennett was buried beneath a gray stone at the Riverton Cemetery, her murder was no longer front-page news. The flowers placed there by grieving students had long since faded. New teachers filled the halls of the school library. Children who once whispered her name with fear now barely remembered it. Time had done what it always did. It moved forward, even when justice did not. Inside the Riverton Police Department, Laura's case file sat on a metal shelf, thick with reports, photographs, and unanswered questions. It was officially classified as a cold case, but for Detective Aaron Cole, it had never stopped burning. Even after his promotion to a supervisory role, he returned to the file late at night when the station was quiet. The silence reminded him too much of the night Laura died. Pressure from the town council and state authorities had been growing. Riverton had limited resources, and unsolved cases drew unwanted attention. The department was instructed to review all cold cases and determine which could realistically remain open. Laura's murder was at the top of the list. The review was meant to be procedural, almost routine. A final look at the evidence. A summary of investigative steps. A determination of whether new leads were likely. Most cases reached the same conclusion. Without new evidence, they were closed. Cole approached the review with dread. He feared not what they might find, but what they wouldn't. The review committee gathered in a small conference room. Senior officers, legal advisors, and a representative from the district attorney's office sat around the table. Laura's photograph rested at the center, her calm expression frozen in time. Cole presented the case carefully. He walked through the timeline again, from Laura's last day at work to the moment her body was found. He described the lack of forced entry, the missing weapon, the absence of defensive wounds. He explained the significance of the anonymous letter and the message draft on Laura's phone. As he spoke, the room remained quiet. No one interrupted. They had heard it all before. Then Cole brought up the spare key. It was the detail that still unsettled him the most. The freshly cut key. The hardware store receipt. The key that was never found. He explained how the key explained everything and nothing at the same time. How it answered the question of entry but created 100 new questions about trust and access. The legal advisor leaned back in his chair and asked the question Cole had been dreading. Do we have proof of who used the key? Cole shook his head. Do we have proof Laura gave it to anyone? Again, no. The room seemed to sink into itself. Without proof, the key was only a theory. A strong one, but still a theory. The district attorney's representative spoke next. She was calm, careful with her words. We cannot take this case to court without a suspect and evidence that directly ties them to the crime. We can't even name a person of interest publicly without risking legal consequences. Cole knew she was right. He hated that she was right. The committee voted later that afternoon. The decision was unanimous. The case would be closed. Not solved. Not resolved. Closed. The official language stated that Laura Bennett's murder remained unsolved due to insufficient evidence and the absence of viable suspects. The investigation would be archived, though it could be reopened if new information emerged. When the decision was announced, it landed like a quiet explosion in Riverton. There were no protests, no loud accusations. Just disappointment. A heavy, shared sense that something had been taken from the town and never returned. Laura's family received the news with controlled grief. Her parents had aged visibly over the years, their faces carrying the weight of waiting. They thanked the police for their efforts, though their eyes said something different. They had hoped for more. They had believed that time would reveal the truth. Instead, time had sealed it away. Cole visited Laura's house one last time before it was sold. The blue paint was chipped now, the yard overgrown. Inside, the new owners had removed most of the original furniture, but the shape of the rooms remained the same. Cole stood in the living room, imagining the night again. He pictured Laura standing there, alive, unaware that her life was about to end. He wondered what she saw when she looked at the person who killed her. Did she recognize them instantly? Did she feel confusion more than fear? The word why echoed in his mind. That single word had become the heart of the case. It suggested betrayal. It suggested shock. It suggested that Laura did not expect what was happening. If the killer had been a stranger, there would have been fear, panic, resistance. But there was none. Cole believed the truth was painfully simple and impossible to prove. The killer was someone Laura trusted enough to give a key. That trust was what killed her. Yet belief was not evidence. And belief was not enough for the law. In the months that followed, life in Riverton slowly adjusted. The blue house sold to a young couple who knew little about its past. The police department moved on to new cases. Detective Cole eventually retired, his career ending without the closure he had hoped for. But the story did not fully dissipate. Late at night, Cole would replay conversations in his mind. Small moments from interviews that once seemed harmless. A pause before an answer. A detail that didn't quite fit but couldn't be challenged. He wondered if the anonymous letter writer was the killer or someone protecting them. He wondered if the truth had brushed past him without leaving a mark. The case being closed did not mean the mystery was gone. It meant it was buried under paperwork and procedure. Years later, a journalist contacted Cole while researching unsolved crimes. She asked him what haunted him most about Laura's case. He thought for a long time before answering. "It's knowing that the truth didn't disappear," he said. "It just stopped mattering enough to chase." The journalist asked if he believed the killer was still free. Cole did not hesitate. "Yes," he said, "and I believe they always will be." Because the case was not closed by discovery or confession. It was closed by exhaustion, by limits, by the reality that some crimes leave behind just enough clarity to hurt, and just enough darkness to hide the truth forever. Laura Bennett's murder changed Riverton, not because it was unsolved, but because it was officially set aside. The town learned that justice did not always arrive with certainty. Sometimes it simply stops trying. And somewhere, whether near or far, the person who walked out of Laura's house that night carried on, untouched by handcuffs, protected not by innocence, but by the absence of proof. The truth had changed nothing. The case was closed. 10 years after Laura Bennett's murder, Riverton looked peaceful again on the surface. The streets were repaved. A new cafe opened near the town square, and children rode their bikes without parents watching from every window. To outsiders, it was the same quiet town it had always been. But beneath that calm lived a memory no one could fully erase. The murder case had been closed for years, yet it never truly left the town's conscience. People rarely spoke about it openly, but it lived in pauses during conversations, in the way doors were locked at night, and in the silent understanding that something terrible had once happened without consequences. The blue house at the edge of town no longer stood out. New owners had painted it white, replaced the fence, and planted flowers in the front yard. They were a young couple who had moved from another city, unaware of the history at first. When they eventually learned what had happened there, they considered leaving. In the end, they stayed. The house itself had done nothing wrong. Still, some neighbors refused to walk past it after dark. Detective Aaron Cole had been retired for 3 years when he received a phone call that reopened old wounds. It was not from the police department, but from a university student named Rachel Moore. She was writing a thesis on unsolved crimes and had chosen Laura Bennett's case as her focus. Rachel asked if Cole would speak with her. At first, he said no. He had told the story too many times already, each retelling reopening a door he preferred to keep closed. But something in Rachel's voice made him change his mind. She did not sound like someone chasing drama. She sounded like someone searching for truth. They met at a small diner on the outskirts of town. Cole arrived early and sat by the window, watching cars pass by slowly. When Rachel walked in, she carried a thick folder and an expression of quiet determination. She listened more than she spoke. Cole found himself telling her things he had never said out loud before. How the case had followed him into his dreams. How he sometimes imagined Laura standing in her kitchen, typing that final word. How the lack of resolution felt heavier than any solved crime he had ever worked. Rachel asked careful questions. Not accusatory, not sensational. "What do you think really happened?" she asked softly. Cole stayed into his coffee before answering. "I think the truth is simple," he said. "And that's why it's so hard to accept." He explained his belief again. That Laura trusted her killer. That the spare key was the silent witness no one could speak for. That the crime was personal, quiet, and intentional. Rachel nodded, taking notes. "But you can't prove it," she said. "No," Cole replied. "And that's why the case ended." Rachel's research brought new attention to the case, even if unofficially. She published an article online, careful to avoid accusations or speculation. She focused on the unanswered questions, the evidence that existed without resolution, and the emotional impact on a town that never received justice. The article spread quietly. It did not go viral, but it reached people who remembered Laura. Old friends left comments. Former classmates shared memories. Some residents of Riverton read it late at night and felt something stir that they had tried to forget. Then something unexpected happened. An email arrived in Rachel's inbox from an anonymous address. The message was short. "You are asking the wrong questions." Rachel showed the email to Cole immediately. He felt the same cold tension he had felt years earlier when the letter arrived at the station. "Did you reply?" he asked. She shook her head. "I wanted to talk to you first." Cole advised caution. Without knowing who sent it, any response could be dangerous or meaningless. Still, the message suggested something important. Someone was watching. Rachel received 2 more emails over the next month. Each was brief and vague, hinting that the truth was closer than anyone realized. None included names or details. They offered no proof, just presence. Rachel debated going to the police, but Cole discouraged it. Without evidence, there was nothing they could act on. The emails could come from anyone. A prankster, a disturbed reader, or someone who knew more than they should. The attention eventually faded again. Rachel graduated. The emails stopped. The case returned to its quiet place in the past. But Cole could not let go. He began reviewing the file one last time, not as a detective bound by procedure, but as a man trying to understand a human truth. He looked at the interviews again, not for evidence, but for emotion, for moments where something felt off. There was one interview he could never forget. A person close to Laura had described her in a way that troubled him. They spoke warmly, affectionately, but there was something rehearsed about their words. At the time, Cole dismissed it as grief. Now, years later, it felt different. Still, feeling was not proof. Cole accepted that the law would never act on what he believed. The case would remain closed in the official record. But closure did not exist in the human sense. Laura's parents passed away within 2 years of each other, never knowing who killed their daughter. Her childhood home was sold. Her name slowly disappeared from public memory. Yet Laura remained present in quieter ways. A former student became a librarian because of her. A colleague still kept a photo of them together in a desk drawer. Emma Collins moved away from Riverton, unable to live with the memory of that final phone call, the one she replayed endlessly in her mind. Sometimes, Emma wondered if she could have done something differently. If she should have driven to Laura's house that night. If she should have listened more carefully to the pause in Laura's voice. Those questions had no answers. Years later, Riverton held a small memorial on the 10th anniversary of Laura's death. It was not organized by the town council or the police. It was started by former students who had grown up and wanted to remember the woman who had helped them find their love of books. They gathered near the school library, lighting candles and sharing stories. Detective Cole stood at the edge of the crowd, unnoticed. He listened as people spoke about Laura not as a victim, but as a person, a teacher, a friend, a gentle presence. For the first time in years, Cole felt something close to peace. The law had failed Laura. The evidence had failed her, but memory had not. As the candles flickered, Cole looked around the town he had spent his life protecting. He understood then that justice did not always come in the form of arrests and trials. Sometimes it existed only in remembrance, in refusing to let a life be reduced to a case file. The killer was never named. No confession was recorded. No courtroom ever heard the story of what truly happened that night. And yet, the truth remained, heavy and silent, carried by those who sensed it but could not prove it. Somewhere, the person who ended Laura Bennett's life continued to wake up each morning, to blend into ordinary routines, to live without consequence. Whether they felt guilt or relief was something no one would ever know. The case was closed. But its shadow remained, because a crime without a killer is not truly finished. It lingers, reminding everyone that certainty is fragile and justice is not guaranteed. Laura Bennett's story did not end with her death. It lived on in the unanswered questions, the quiet suspicion, and the uneasy knowledge that sometimes the truth is known only to the people who will never speak it. And in Riverton, when the nights grow quiet and the wind moves through the trees near the edge of town, some still remember the night the silence broke, and the case that was closed without ever truly ending.